Tonight we're in Durham, and welcome to Question Time. And a big welcome to you watching at home, to our audience here who, of course, make the running by asking the questions and arguing with our panel, who don't know what's going to be asked of them yet. The chairman of the Conservative Party, Grant Shapps, Labour's Shadow Transport Secretary, Mary Creagh, the president of the Liberal Democrats, Tim Farron, the radio talk show host, Julia Hartley-Brewer, and the Archbishop of York, John Sentamu. Thanks very much. And our first question is from Matthew Ferguson, please. Matthew Ferguson.
Is Benefit Street an example of broken Britain, and what more can be done to stop people living off the state their entire lives?
Is Benefit Street, this was the programme that's being put out by Channel 4, an example of broken Britain, and what more can be done to stop people living off the state their entire lives? This is James Turner Street in Birmingham. I hope you've all seen it. John Sentamu.
There's been a lot of people complaining about that programme, by the way. Thinking that, yes, people could be benefit, but to just characterize all those who want benefit, that is really what is going on in our society, I don't think is right. I used to be Bishop of Birmingham, and I know the problems and difficulties in that city. I also know that the people at the moment who, not just on benefits, but working, but finding it very difficult, actually, to make ends meet. So I think it took a particular section of people and tried to give the impression that everybody is on benefit, it's just like that, so we better stop it. I believe that individual responsibility does matter, and people have got to be very careful what they do. But also, let me tell you, there are some places like Hull, where to get a job is very, very difficult.
But it's reasonable to talk about that part of Birmingham,
yes,
and go into some depth into it. It was clearly a place with an interesting story and a problem.
It is an interesting story and a problem, but the problem we've got at the moment is the suggestion that people are feckless. That's why they are all on benefits. And therefore, we've got to be very careful. The money that has been taken out of welfare and caring actually is so huge, and you're expecting people to just make ends meet. And for me, yes, it's good to go in depth and study it, but please don't sensationalize it in the sense of suggesting that most people won't benefit are just as that particular street. That particular street needs a lot of help, a lot of support, a lot of care, and a lot of encouragement, and make sure that it isn't simply a question of out of benefits into work. Some problems, actually, to break the cycle of this dependency takes a long time and sometimes generations. So.
All right, Matthew Ferguson, what did you make of it?
I think it just shows you what is wrong with the welfare system, that people on benefits can go out and spend all of the money on cigarettes, alcohol and drugs, yet people who's working can't do the same thing. And I think what needs to change is, I think the government should start giving people food vouchers for supermarkets and travel passes so they can get to the job centre and to work, instead of giving them free money.
And did you see it as typical of... Did you see it as typical of a broken Britain, as I think a phrase used by the Conservatives at the last election?
I think it is. I think the cap what the government has put on welfare is probably the right step, and more needs to be done.
And you, sir, in the second row there, what do you think?
Isn't it the fact, though, that many of the benefits are paid to the working poor? Yes, there are feckless, but they're surely not the majority. Yes, I myself, ship captain, I've seen some deprivation, like around the world, something that makes James Street look like luxury. But a lot of benefits are paid to older people, to working people who are being really, I feel like, badly treated in this country with regard to minimum wage, living wage, 0 hours contracts and what have you. Yes, there is a bad picture in Benefit Street. I certainly believe that it's been edited, but you politicians, look at yourselves. What are you going to do to deal with it, to help people? What are you going to do? Admittedly, with less money.
Grant Shapps.
Well, first of all, I don't know about the production quality or standards of that programme. There certainly have been lots of accusations about whether it was complete. For example, this morning on the radio there was a couple who work in that street who don't apparently feature in the programmes that have yet to be shown. But the most cruel thing of all, as has been suggested, is the idea that when you try to get out of that trap of benefits, it actually doesn't pay you. In other words, work must always pay in this country. And that is a fundamental change to the benefit system through the universal credit that Ian Duncan Smith has spent so much time bringing in. That is the most important thing that could happen in this country. Today, the gentleman mentions about people who are the working poor. You may not have heard this afternoon, but the Chancellor has said that the government would like to see that minimum wage now rise to perhaps something like £7 to take into account inflation. He said that that's possible because we've taken some of those really difficult decisions. As the Archbishop says, we came into government at a time when this country was about to go bust, when we had the same debts, same size as deficits, countries like Greece, where your family had all been costed £3,000 because of the Great Recession. So we had to do something, and that included making sure that benefits, like housing benefits, came under control. But the biggest help we can give of all is making sure that when people work, they are always better off by doing a day's work than on benefits.
Mary Creagh.
Well, my first reaction to the programme was that I didn't need to watch the television to see the effects of poverty on the lives of people, because my casework, my surgeries are full of people describing the effects of the government's welfare changes on their lives. And they come to me when their disability living allowance has been stopped and they're waiting for 6 months, 12 months on a reduced income with the same outgoings, waiting for an assessment. And I see people who have delays in their benefits, and I talk to my local church and the food bank that they're running there, and I see the heartbreaking letters. And I visited a food bank in Stevenage last week, and they described to me the people crying as they got their Christmas hampers, as they came just before Christmas, and there was a hamper there, and they were collecting outside Asda, it was. So that was my first instinct, but then I thought, well, let's watch, and I watched the second episode, and what I saw in that second episode was the church and the councillors working together to try and enter the street into Britain in Bloom. I saw people trying to brighten up their area, clearing up the rubbish, planting hanging baskets, and I also saw people coming in here to work on the fields as labourers, working 17 hours a day and getting £10 for that day. What is the government doing to tackle the abuses in the employment industry that means that we effectively, in the agricultural sector and in other sectors of the economy, are having people working effectively in slave-like conditions?
All right. You, sir, over there, yes. Let's hear from some of our audience. What do you think?
I've worked for 21 years, and due to this government's policies, I was made unemployed for 3 months. And to be labelled a scrounger by someone like Matthew at the back of the room is an absolute disgrace. I am not a scrounger. I paid my taxes for 21 years.
Did you call him a scrounger, Matthew? I didn't think you called him a scrounger, did you?
He labelled me as a drug addict, someone who...
Yeah, I don't think he did.
He certainly did, yes.
He didn't even see you from where he was.
It was more the people that cheat the system and stay on it for their whole lives. The
people
like
who don't
James
pay
Street.
taxes.
OK. The woman there in the middle there, you, yes.
I just think people are really quick to suddenly say, oh, just go get out a job if you're not in that situation. We're living in a country where we have graduates who can't get a job, and you're expecting people who have possibly no work experience to get a job. I mean, I tried getting a job when I didn't have work experience when I was younger, and they were like, you don't have any work experience. Well, how do we expect people to get it? If you want people to volunteer, well, that doesn't pay money. So they still need the benefits, so you don't realise how much people are trying to get these jobs.
Did you see these programmes?
Yeah, I've saw
Did you? What did you think?
I thought, I agree with Archbishop that they generalised way too much.
All right. And the person there in the white... Yes, you.
I think the vast majority of people that are unemployed do want to get work, but there is a minority that are working the system. They are generational unemployment issues, especially up north. And why can't we talk about that? Why is a programme that highlights that being accused of demonising them? Isn't that something we can talk about?
Julie Hartley-Brewer.
Well, exactly. There seem to be two different criticisms this week of Benefit Street as poverty porn. One was that these people simply don't exist. This is outrageous. It's terrible generalisations, as the gentleman said at the front. And then there was, well, if they do exist, we shouldn't demonise these people. As you say, the vast majority of people claiming unemployment benefit will do so for a very short time, a matter of months between getting jobs. But there is an underclass, there is a section, a small minority, but a growing minority of people who are, you say, working the system. I think the system is working them. I think the problem is Not people being angry at these people, but people should be angry at the system and the politicians, and yes, I include all of you on this panel, who've allowed this to happen. Because we've got an entire section of the society who are being left to rot. They have...
How would you stop it happening if you were a politician?
Well,
you're in the comfortable position of being a commentator.
Well, for many years, we had... the thing about this, very difficult to get people into work at a time when we've got so many people unemployed. There aren't enough jobs for everybody who's unemployed. But in the boom years, under 13 years of Labour, there certainly were enough jobs. We were importing people to do the jobs while we left millions and underclass out of work. People left on the scrap heap with no incentive to get up. Oh, you've got no skills. Oh, you've got no qualifications. You're unemployable, not unemployed. But it doesn't matter. We'll just pay you to live a life like that. Drinking a can of lager at 10 in the morning? If I didn't have anything to get up for, I'd be drinking a can of lager at 10 in the morning. These people are making rational choices. They can do a minimum wage job if they can get it, and they'll be about sort of a couple of quid better off than if they were on the dole. Why would they bother? We've created a system, and we, the voters, we've allowed it to happen as well, where we just say, we'll just accept that there are 1 million people, or 500,000, however many it is, who just are left on the scrap heap for the rest of their lives. It is a terrible economic waste, but more than that, it is a terrible waste of a human life and human potential. And everyone who's been a politician in the last 20 years should be ashamed of themselves.
All right. Is she right? Should they be ashamed of themselves? Is it the politicians' fault, Bishop? Archbishop?
I suspect that when the welfare state was set up, Beveridge really never intended it to be something for nothing. It was always something for something. He intended it to be a sort of a social insurance in which people could actually, in their shortest term, could actually be helped. The problem is this. We've got 5 million low-paid workers who are now, most of them, needing to depend on food banks. So it isn't true that work does pay. Until you lift the 5 million out of poor wages so that they can actually support their families properly, you're always going to have this problem. And the other thing is the Prince of Wales Trust brought out a report that three quarters of a million of young people feel they have no future, no hope. And how are you going to do that unless actually you get a system in which, that's why I'm sitting on the Living Wage Commission. Good, the Chancellor talks about £7, but, you know, Professor Baines, who started the minimum wage, actually said, had it kept up with inflation, people now will be paid £19 an hour, not just the £7. So you need something more dramatic than that.
£10.
Yeah.
£19 an hour?
Yeah, and I mean, it's not dishonest journalism. I think it's a better programme than some of its press has suggested, but it is, of course, selective. These are real people. They represent a proportion of the UK. But you could just as easily pick a street in Kensington and Chelsea with a whole bunch of people on 7-figure salaries who are absolutely scrounging and aren't paying any tax. And I think we need to think...
absolutely absurd.
No more absurd than what we're talking about. There's a real people who exist in this country. And what I think is appalling is that you have a group of people who are being represented by this programme who, whether they realise it or not, are effectively robbed of their dignity. And it is absolutely right that we understand that the way out of poverty has got to be work. What I find really intolerable is the way that many people decide to try and divide and rule between the kind of working poor and the non-working poor. The average person who is out of work desperately wants to get into work, and we need to support them to do that. That's why I am delighted that finally George Osborne has caught up with Vince Cable and wants to increase the minimum wage. Good news. That is an excellent move, and that should happen. It's right that the government has lifted income tax thresholds so that you've now got 24 million people with an £800 tax cut and the lowest paid 2 million not paying income tax at all. But you've got to do loads more. I meet tons of people in my constituency in the Lake District with very low unemployment but very low wages who are better off on benefits, and many of them choose to work despite the fact that it's against their interest. That is a disgrace. But the answer is not to demonise those who, through no fault of their own, are on benefits.
Let's hear from some more members of the audience. You, sir, yes.
Poverty is a disease, and it's very difficult to get out of that disease. The people that are in poverty are the people that are being exploited by the power companies, the gas companies, and the landlords that are supplying their houses. This is a big problem, the exploitation of people in poverty, because most of the people in poverty have came from poverty. And the benefit system has only improved in the last 20 years. You can't say it's always been a fantastic benefit system. I must admit, it's a wonderful benefit system we have. But people in poverty have came from poverty, and it's very difficult to escape it.
OK. And you?
Being a recent graduate who is from the North East, I've really struggled to get a job here. I want to stay in the North East, but I know that in order to do what I want to do, I'm going to have to move to London. Why can't we recognise that decentralisation of jobs and opportunities need to be brought to the North East?
What did you make of that? What did you make of the stories that were told in Benefit Street and the conundrum that was posed there?
I think, you know, there are people who genuinely do want to work, but those people are not represented on reality TV shows. It's always, like the Archbishop said, the people who we think are the feckless ones in society.
And the woman up there on the left. There.
Hi, I don't believe in broken Britain. I think there's parts of Britain that are rubbing along quite nicely, thank you very much. I think there are broken communities within Britain, and I think successive governments, through changes in industry, which has been completely removed from this community, have robbed people of the chance for a really decent working wage. And then we had a government after that that created an over-reliance on state handouts. People don't need money poured on them. They need community-led initiatives that are going to help them find their own opportunities out of the situation they find themselves in.
Does that...
In particular, I mean, you know, I'm from the other side of the Pennines, but, you know, I absolutely loved every minute of the 4 years I spent up here at University in Newcastle. And what I saw in this part of the world, and you see it over in the northwest as well, is you've got big industries where people work really hard all their lives that collapsed in the 80s, broadly speaking. And what happened then was you got a kind of sequence of inherited welfare dependency. One generation ended up out of work and without hope, and that almost became inherited. And that is why we've got to understand that the solution to broken Britain, or whatever it is not to concentrate everything on the City of London and on the southeast of England, but to recognise there are proud cities like this one that can lead from the front.
Let's come back to Matthew's question. Grant Shapps, the last point from you. What can be done to stop people living off the state their entire life?
Yeah, well,
is £7 minimum wage going to do that?
Well, I think, look, we've always said that this is going to be a difficult...
John Sentamu says it should be £18 or £19.
Yeah, I actually don't think the figure is correct. This
well,
£7...
he's sitting on the committee.
He's spoken to somebody else. We need to check it, but the...
Well, all right, well, no, let's just check it now.
Well, Lord Baines, who started the minimum wage, said that had the government followed his recommendation and his policies, it would now be about £19.
Oh, maybe.
Why? Because of the rising prices. And unfortunately, even the National Office for Statistics actually said the drop in the to 2% of the inflation due to things. First of all, the slow rising of food prices, but then they went on to say the trouble is prices are still rising twice the ordinary wage is rising, and therefore the price crisis is still very strong. And as I sit on the Living Wage Commission, we're going to make some recommendations so that people can really get income on which they can live, and there are companies that can afford it.
Okay.
Small-sized businesses may not at the beginning, but it's quite important to recognise that why should I earn a lot of money, pay the same amount of gas like anybody else, same type of VAT like anybody else, and then those on very low wages struggling, and then we seem to say to them, oh, come on, do better than that. They can't.
Well, look, first of all, what this rise would do would bring it back to where it was pre-recession to keep up with inflation. That's what the £7 do. You may be right going back much further than that. What I actually listen to the audience, what I actually think about Benefit Street programme is it doesn't reflect some of the true realities of Britain, as other panel members have said. For example, you wouldn't know from watching that programme that there are fewer workless households in Britain than ever before. You wouldn't know that there were more people in work in this country, including more women in this country in work than ever before. And I think that, as Julia was saying, there are many changes that still need to be made, but thank goodness we are finally getting a benefits system in this country where no one will earn more on benefits than the average person can earn
Grant,
in work.
you talked about the universal credit. It hasn't come in yet because it's in universal chaos.
No,
you had a vote yesterday. You and Tim. yesterday, there was a vote from the Labour Party on the national minimum wage saying it needed to be strengthened, restored and proper enforcement because only 2 firms have been prosecuted for non-payment of the national minimum wage since you two came into power, and you voted against that.
Well, because it had an insult. You insulted both the parties.
Yeah, you'll be pleased to hear that
the
fine
idea that
to
today
companies
George
for not
Osborne
paying
is
a
going to
minimum
raise
rate.
the national minimum wage.
Hold on, Mary.
Let's
Let's just deal in facts here. The fine is going to be
talk
raised.
about the work that people are doing, Grant.
The fine.
Low-paid, 0 hours, poverty pay, part-time contracts, and they aren't able to feed their families and pay their bills at the end of the week.
In which case, you'll be pleased to hear that we're about to quadruple the fine on firms who don't pay the minimum wage
means
to
nothing if you're not
£20,000.
prosecuting them.
Quadruple it. I mean, that's a
means
big...
nothing if there's no prosecuting.
There was
and
one... Do you know how many prosecutions in the last year of Labour there were for firms not paying the minimum wage? One.
Well, that's what you've done 2 in 4 years. What we've got to have is 8.
How many years did you have?
Well, I don't know the figures, but we definitely brought it in.
This is getting very tedious. This tit for tat. Over there, you. Yes.
Well, I think I'd like to continue on what Tim Farron was saying. That I would put it forward that no one in the UK doesn't want to be working. No one wants to live a pointless existence for nothing. And the problem is that there are too many people in this country directing their anger and passions towards the most vulnerable people in society, rather than directing their passions where it should be on companies like Vodafone and Amazon that have robbed our high street of jobs, robbed money from the public pocket and do nothing for this country but rob us of tax.
There is a sense of that.
One last point from you.
I personally think that when it comes to Benefit Street, that I actually saw, the positives that came out of that, and that there was great community spirit, and that the fact of the matter is, when we've got an ageing population, and more than half of our population is going to be over 70, and we're almost doubling our dementia cases, who's going to be making the best dementia communities with that kind of spirit?
You thought that was a good community?
Yeah, I did. In its spirit, I definitely thought it was.
OK. Yeah. Thank you very much. Well, Benefit Street or whatever, if you want to join in the debate from home, you can text or Twitter us at your command. We have hashtag BBCQT. You can follow us at BBC Question Time. You can text us on 83981. And you can push the red button and see what other people are texting. We'll go on to another question now, I think, and this is from William Kilvington Shaw, please. Mr. William Kilvington Shaw.
So, despite the potential hazards, are the economic benefits and job opportunities of fracking simply too good to miss?
Despite the hazards, are the benefits too... What's your view?
Well, we look in America, initially there was quite a lot of opposition and problems with it, but now we see a lot of investment in it, and they're reaping the rewards with a lot lower gas prices. And obviously, we just discussed the problems with people finding jobs. So it's going to create possibly a large number of jobs. So I can't see why it's a bad thing.
So you're excited by fracking?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Tim Farron.
I am less excited by fracking, William, I'm afraid. And it's not for some of the reasons that have been put out there. I mean, I don't know, really, the geological consequences. The science is not all that clear about that. The impact on the water table, the impact on the landscape and all those things. Those are all moot points, and they're interesting points made on both sides. My honest view is that the most serious problem facing humankind is climate change. What on earth are we doing signing up for another fossil fuel?
So what did you make of... What do you make of David Cameron's proposal of tax relief and all the rest of it?
If a community is going to be blighted by any kind of development, then there is, I guess, there's a fairness in that there should be some compensation. And I wouldn't say what I've said about the securing of shale gas if I didn't think there were completely obvious other alternatives. This island, surrounded by water, because islands tend to be, and the lack of use that we make of tidal power. You think of Germany with something like a fifth of the coastline that we have, and yet several times more tidal energy than we are making use of in this country. If you also think that 95% of the supply chain of the hydro and tidal energy industry is British, unlike shale gas, unlike nuclear, for example, not only would you be able to set a future that can actually protect and mitigate against climate change, you would create hundreds of thousands of British jobs. That's why we should be going tight.
You're a funny old party, the Liberal Democrats, aren't you?
Well
spotted, but I mean, you're president of the Liberal Democrats. One of your senior ministers in this government the Energy Minister has responsibility for this. He says the exact opposite.
Well, we compromise, and there are different
There's no
views that
compromise
help.
there.
I mean, the point is
Where's the compromise?
He's the Secretary of State in the Energy Department in a coalition government, and I retain the right to, stand up for what I believe.
To pull the rug from under his feet.
I understand the argument. There are some strong arguments. We have to look for where did the energy come from. The arguments in favour of shale gas, which other people will put forward, I am sure, are about energy security and the speed of being able to get it. These are reasonable conclusions to reach. I just think there are arguments on both sides, but the bottom line is, when we are trying to fight climate change, going for another form of carbon emission is just foolish and short-sighted.
OK. Mary Creagh.
Well, I think gas is an important part of our energy mix, and if shale can replace our dwindling North Sea reserves and improve our energy security, we need to look at it seriously. However...
Looking at something seriously is gobbledygook for question time. Do you mean it should be done or it shouldn't be done? You can't look at something seriously. Of course it's serious.
I think it needs to be robustly regulated and comprehensively monitored. What that means is testing the water supplies before anything happens, monitoring for seismic activity for 12 months beforehand, working out what impact this is going to have on the local community and making absolutely sure there's a proper environmental impact assessment that is carried out. What we mustn't have is a sort of feeling that, the government offering bribes to local councils saying, you can keep 100% of the business rates. Councils that are making the planning decisions on these fracking applications have to do that in a quasi-judicial role. If they're thinking, but we could be getting £1 million a year for the next X years, then that compromises the impartiality of the decision.
So should communities not benefit from taking on fracking?
Communities should benefit.
But not through the council?
No, I don't think it should be done through the business rates direct to the council. I think that creates perverse outcomes. And I also think, just to go back to Tim's point about climate change, gas is half the carbon footprint of oil and coal. And if we could reduce our carbon footprint by 50% in one go, most people would think that's a good thing.
Well, look, I think it makes...
It's a bribe.
Well, I'll come to that in a sec, but I think...
Well, go to it straight, because that's what you said.
OK. And I don't think it's a bribe. I think that by giving communities £100,000 when the exploratory work's carried out, 1% of the revenue, and as was just being described, all of the business rates, it does provide incentives for the communities to actually benefit. And if you're going to have some inconvenience in your community, and actually fracking is nowhere near as inconvenient as a coal mine or something, just because the footprint is probably no bigger than the size of a house, but I think there should still be benefits back. But on the wider question that was asked, look, if there's shale to be exploited in this country, don't we owe it to the hard-working families in this country who put up with high energy prices to make sure we can give them that secure energy supply? Of course it does. They're doing it in America. We've seen that there's no international evidence at all of problems to do with earthquakes or contaminated supplies. But, of course, we want to make sure we've got the safest possible rules and regulations in place, and we'll do that. But, of course, it makes sense for hard-working families in this country to be able to access cheaper energy to heat their homes.
And, of course, yes, that's another...
Where's the evidence?
The Conservative policy was the large, uninhabited and desolate areas of the North East that are suitable.
It's certainly for a start. You can only frack for shale gas where it is, and it's actually all over the country. So
it's not Tory policy to follow Lord Howe and just deal with. Yes, sir, you up there on the left.
Tim Farron suggests that we try and use renewables as much as possible, and of course that's a good idea, but you cannot rely on them. If we want to have electricity 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, we've got to have something as a backup supply.
And you're in favour of fracking?
I am, because we're going to have to use gas to make electricity when the renewables are not making enough for us.
There is nothing more reliable than the tide. It happens all the time.
But it's...
Honestly, you're right about wind. You're right about other renewables.
It's only twice a day.
Twice a day. It's particularly expensive.
Not when it's built, it's not. Once it's done, it's an upfront investment, I agree, but then it lasts forever.
Does it with salt? Does it last forever? I thought otherwise it would have been done.
You have to maintain things. But, I mean, when the shale's gone, the shale's gone. The sea will be there for some time.
Well, but what do you think, sir? Till the next Ice Age.
To go ahead, unless it is allowed to go ahead. Nobody's ever going to know if it's totally viable.
Absolutely.
So you'd like to see at least experiments with it?
I would.
Yes. A lot of people now. The woman in yellow there, what do you think?
Well, I disagree very much with the original questioner. We're not America. We haven't got the vast spaces that America has. We're a tiny island, and the impact on us would be enormous. I agree completely with you, Tim Farron, that we should be going for renewables. Apparently in America, the shale is already beginning to run out, and it hasn't led to lower prices because they've been exporting the coal that they continue to mine in order to continue to raise the prices.
Julia, you're disagreeing with
would
her,
also like
yeah?
to... Yes, I do disagree with fracking. But I
she
would also
disagrees
like
with
to
you.
say, is it significant that Total have bought 50% or bought into 50%, 47% of our fracking when France has banned fracking in
Let's
their
not
country?
follow the example of the French economy.
Julia.
The problem we've got in this country is that we don't have a sane energy policy. In fact, we don't have an energy policy at all, and we haven't for a very, very long time. Every single government has kicked it into the long grass. Oh, well, we'll deal with it later. We don't build nuclear power stations. We don't deal properly with renewables and the like. The problem I have with the people who oppose fracking, with all due respect to those of you who do, they seem to be the same people who oppose nuclear energy, who oppose coal, who oppose gas, who oppose oil. People who won't be happy until we're all sitting in mud huts surrounded by wind turbines and reading by candlelight. I like heat and I like light. I don't want the lights to go on. I want factories to be able to stay working. I would like heat and light 24 hours a day. I want people to be able to drive their cars and for trains to work. We need new energy resources. It's all very well saying, oh, we know gas supplies might run out. We've been a gas importer for the last 10 years. We need energy that we can be reliable on, that can be secure. We need energy security. Yes, we need it to be safe, but we have a lot tighter regulation in this country than America does. The shale gas isn't running out in America. What has happened in America is that their energy prices have come down. Now, that won't, and you know this very well, Grant, that won't happen here. I'll tell you why. Because it's a French company that's going to be doing all the work. Now, I want it to go ahead, but I want it to be a British company, and I don't want French shareholders benefiting from it. I want British people, British consumers who buy their energy here to be benefiting from it. And I don't know why the governments can't make this happen.
Why can't the government make this happen?
To make the potential for Shell to pay off, we need to welcome investment from anybody who wants to invest in this industry. There's lots of
Do you mean
British...
nobody in Britain does?
No, there's lots of British expertise and investment going into Shell.
How much is Total having?
I'm afraid I haven't got the figure off the top of my head.
You say 47%?
I didn't, but I mean, Quadrilla, again, they're Bermuda-based. No one's going to benefit from that.
What? 40%.
What I was going to say is...
He's the expert.
OK.
You are now.
I read it. Look, the point is, we've got a lot of expertise in oil, gas, excavation in this country, and so a lot of British expertise will go in this. And because we are getting into it, before France, for example, who have banned it at home, they're happy to carry on paying high prices, we'll be able to export that expertise in exploration in the future, in the same way as North Sea oil has enabled this country to export that
But our
expertise
prices won't come
around
down.
the world. Well,
Not a single person in the government has ever predicted the prices will come down as a result of
Well,
this.
look,
Why
one thing
not?
I do know is that there's more ways of producing electricity, including, as Tim says, through renewables and nuclear, and we have now commissioned the first nuclear power station this year.
Why don't prices come down? She says they did in
Eventually,
America.
when these things come online, they will. The prices will come
No,
down.
they won't. No, there have been plenty of reports.
Speculating.
No, I'm not. I'm quoting
We don't
reports.
know for sure.
I'm quoting reports from select committees.
You know
from,
for sure.
No one knows for sure, other than to say that the more provision of
No one
energy...
is predicting prices
No,
will
that's
come
not,
down. Who is predicting?
I am predicting the prices will come down if we can get more supply of different types of energy, and we've got, we've got the oil, which will run out. We need to be replacing that with other things. Gas is actually, environmentally, as Mary said, much better for the environment than, for example, coal.
You can pipe it over to continental Europe. Unlike, you can't pipe shale gas out of the United States. You can pipe gas out of the UK. As long as you can pipe it to Europe, that is what the energy companies will do. That is what they always do.
Let's hear from our audience. You said in the second row from the back there.
It's extremely annoying when you hear politicians such as Mary Creagh talk about looking at things very seriously. We're not looking to reinvent the wheel here. The Japanese and the Americans have led the way in fracking, so much so that America will be entirely producing their own energy within half a generation, which should actually be embracing the comments that were slightly misspoken by the Tory peer who said we should be fracking in the North East. We should be looking at Northumberland, we should be looking at County Durham and rebuilding the industry in the area.
But this is a novel industrial process, and if you want communities to come with you, it's a novel process for this country, and we don't have the regulatory regimes. They're not set up, and the processes aren't there. So we need to make sure the Environment Agency is able to issue the permits, that the regulation, the planning is able to deal with it. And that's how you get communities to have confidence.
All right, those points have been made. Let's not remake those points. John Sentamu.
On this particular question, I'm ambivalent, simply because I'm not so sure that we've actually secured the whole question of the environment, that there'll be security which can be sustained, that there'll be proper controls. I'm also not persuaded about prices. Remember when everything was privatized in terms of oil and gas and electricity, we were told it would bring down prices. And these gas companies and oil companies, electric companies have been charging us far, far too much. So the same thing will happen here, unless we know that the end result is going to lead to lower prices. And the fact that the chairman of the Conservative Party can't commit himself to this. So I don't want to live in a mud hut, by the way. I left that back in Uganda when I left it. The people who really are asking questions, they must be answered. And the government has got to come up with very clear answers why it must be done, that we will be secure in terms of geology, that there will be no earthquakes. Remember Blackpool? There was a difficulty there when they first started to experiment down there. So I'm not so sure that the questions have gone away. I wish them well, but I still remain slightly skeptical. And because I don't want to live in a mad hut, I don't know why the government, for example, does not work on nuclear fusion, because that would be a much cleaner power to use. Why not?
Okay. Yeah. You said the back.
I actually think, again, we're taking our eye a little bit off the ball here, because one of the big issues we've got here in the North East is fuel poverty. People are finding it very hard to heat their homes and afford to eat as well. And actually, I think we're missing the trick, because there's a huge amount of opportunity to invest in our existing housing, to save energy and prices through investment in the housing structure, and give people that opportunity to actually do more with their own income. And I think that's an area we need to focus more on.
So insulation, you mean, rather than fracking?
Efficient boilers, easy measures that don't have these huge environmental risks.
But there are a whole lot of steps, that, if I'm right, that have been taken to encourage that, and they don't seem to have actually
They need further investment and support, and that's where I'm looking to see that from the government.
And the arm, I can't see who it's attached to, that arm. You say, yes.
Yeah, I think specifically in relation to the North East, I think that fracking would be a great opportunity for this area. And I think a lot of people, when they think about the North East, think about the loss of industry. And I think that David Cameron's suggestion of 1% revenue as soon as gas starts coming out would be extremely beneficial to a lot of communities in this area.
OK, and you say in the third row.
I've just got sceptics in the land grab that's going on from the land registry. They've said historic landowners now clamouring to establish boundaries. So what's going to come back to the communities might not be as much as the gentleman says.
But the landowners will claim
they will claim their share first, and the serfs will eat dinner.
Mineral rights, yeah.
Well, tell us about... No, don't tell us about
Just one comment, which is just in relation to...
I want to go to the woman up there on the gangway.
A couple of the audience have mentioned the industrial benefits. The Institute of Directors reckons 74,000 jobs could eventually be created through the fracking industry. This gives a chance to help end fuel poverty and bring down fuel prices. Why on earth would we not, as a country, want to go ahead and do this?
All right. And a last point from you.
I don't know much about the arguments environmentally for or against fracking, but what I do think is that the energy companies and utility companies have not exactly proven themselves to be trustworthy or to put consumers first, so I don't see why we should trust them on this issue either.
OK. Alex Bell, let's go to you, please.
In an area of high unemployment, what impact will mass immigration have on the North East?
What? Alex Bell, what's your view of that?
Overall, it'll be a negative impact. There's lots of unemployment in the area. It will create higher competition for jobs, and it will also put further strain on public services, which are already under high amounts of pressure.
You're worried about it?
Yes.
Julia Hartley-Brewer.
Obviously, I work for a radio station in London where there's been a massive impact of immigration and around the southeast as well. So I'm not as au fait with what the situation is up here. But I think we have a lot of reports from politicians on either side saying about the economic costs, the overall cost. There was a report from the Office of Budget Responsibility this week saying that there's a small net benefit to Treasury coffers of immigration. We keep hearing about the ratio of people who pay tax or claim benefits of people who come from abroad. But I think that, as always, ignores the real issue. Because I think the real cost of immigration is actually to individual people and individual families and to local communities. It's the competition for jobs, the competition for housing, competition certainly in London for school places, for maternity services, for access to your GP, to A&E. I have nothing but admiration and respect for someone who leaves their homeland, leaves their family and goes to make a new life for themselves and tries to better themselves and their family. They deserve absolutely nothing but respect and our admiration. But there is nevertheless an effect on people who are already living here, particularly actually on people who are often the children of previous immigrant families, because they tend to be at the bottom of the economic and social pile. And those are the people that they are competing with for jobs. And the problem I have is, again, we've got a political class and a media class, of which I am one, where immigration on a mass scale, as it has happened over the last 15 years or so, means that we get nannies and gardeners, and I suppose the bankers, they get their dog walkers. They get, you know, we have Eastern European immigrants or immigrants from across the world who provide services to us.
Are you seriously saying that you are influenced, in your opinion, by having somebody to walk your dog?
No, I don't have a dog. I have guinea pigs. It's not quite such.
But you don't have to walk guinea pigs.
I'm saying that the political class and the media class that sort of controls the debate and did for many years.
Are you serious about this?
You think they just
like? Well, no, I'm asking you. You're seriously saying that
I think
the politicians and the media, because they get cheap servants from immigration...
No, it's not cheap. I think they've ignored the reality because their experience of immigration is, oh, we've got a lovely Latvian nanny. Their experience is not their children going to a school where half the children don't speak English as a first language. Their experience is not their entire local neighbourhood changing irrevocably over a matter of small years. It's not about racism. It's not about xenophobia. It's not about fear. It's not about hatred. It's about the ability of any country, regardless of colour, regardless of culture, ability to absorb large numbers of people who can assimilate and join those communities and be part of those
communities. What should the policy be?
Policy for me, I'm certainly in favour of... I'm very largely on this issue in favour of the UKIP side of the policy in terms of having a stall on mass immigration in this country, the Tory cap doesn't appear to be working, and actually having a realistic look at how many people can live on a very small island.
The woman with spectacles there on the gangway. That's you. Yes.
I believe that most people in this country would welcome immigrants if they come and they're able to support themselves, they have a job to come to. I think that most people in this country are against immigrants when they come and in 3 months' time they can claim benefits. They can ask for a council house. I don't think that is right. We are a very small island. We have a large population and it's growing all the time. We cannot support all these people coming. If it was reversed and we could go to their countries and claim the same, which I don't think we can, then, you know, it would be a fair and level playing field.
Mary Creagh.
Well, immigration is a massive issue, and it's a big issue in my constituency in Wakefield. And what the government has is a target on net migration, which it's not meeting. Net migration is actually up because that target depends on the number of Brits who go abroad to live and work. My parents came here to work. My dad came from Ireland, my mum came from Northern Ireland in the 60s. And most people who move abroad to work want to build a better life for themselves and their family, and they contribute to the tax revenue, and they build a home and they build a life for themselves.
But the point about this questioner was, in an area of high unemployment, is that desirable? That was your point,
looking
wasn't it?
for work tend not to move to areas of high unemployment in order to find work, which is why we see the population growing in London and South East and some of the very big pressures on schools, on public services and on housing. That's not to say that those pressures don't exist in my constituency in Wakefield. We have a very multicultural education system now with our schools, and that has changed over the last 10 years. But what we're seeing is the government failing to take action on illegal immigration, failing to tackle the exploitation of those workers who are vulnerable, failing to tackle the overcrowded housing in which they are living, and failing to deport people who shouldn't be here and who are here illegally.
If we're talking about this particular area, my personal experience is that it definitely impacts on our public services. I work in accident and emergency, and at one point I thought that I should learn Polish because it was the amount of time that we had to spend, for example, getting an interpreter in so that we were able to communicate and effectively treat patients. And interestingly, on the subject of whether people, when we were talking earlier about benefits, the same cohort misuse the service. People who haven't been in the country for a long time, haven't registered with GPs, use services inappropriately, puts more strain and means that we can't operate efficiently as an accident and emergency department.
Well, there are a lot of people who who've lived in this country all their life who use A&E inappropriately, and I think it's not necessarily helpful to the debate to say that people turning up to A&E, people find it very difficult to get access to their GPs. We're seeing the unfurling of the government's reorganisation.
All right, let's not go into the NHS. Let's come back to the point.
In A&E, I agree.
Okay.
We've had this week the fact that the amount of locums going up.
All right, I said let's not go into the NHS. Let's stick with immigration. Julia said. Grant Shapps, that she was in favour of UKIP's policy on this. And Nigel Farage this week or last week was asked about this and said he would rather give up growth than have more immigration. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't. Look,
is that a fair choice?
No, it's not.
Is it a false dichotomy?
It's probably false, but I don't agree with it either way. Let me tell you what I actually think in answer to the question, which is I believe that over the decades and the centuries, immigration has enriched this country and has helped Britain develop the economy it's got today. The problem is that when the system is completely unchecked and nobody is paying attention to the system, the pressure on the health service that you work in, or on housing, the area that I used to look after, or on benefits gets out of control. And frankly, to hear a Labour politician on this panel attack this government, which has brought net immigration down by nearly a third, when they were responsible for 2.3 million more people coming into this country under a completely broken system that Lord Manderson has written that in 2004, as a Labour government, they were not only welcoming people into this country, but sending out search parties for people. To be savaged by a Labour politician on record on immigration, I think, is completely ludicrous.
What about the thing that was at the heart of this, the effect on a place with high unemployment?
Yeah.
As you know, this part of Britain has unemployment higher than the rest of the United Kingdom. Is it going to be adversely affected?
Well, as I said, in answer to the question, the problem is when services get squeezed, and that's why we have taken action, for example, to make sure that some of those false colleges, all those false colleges have been closed down, that we actually ensure that people can't come here and then bring other family members here from outside of the EU, and that even with the new EU immigration, they don't get automatic access.
But you don't want to stop
like,
immigration dead?
Well, look, for a start, we're in Europe. If we want to have a changed relationship with the rest of Europe on immigration, then we must have a referendum on Europe, and the only way we can get that...
Anytime you want.
And
We're ready.
Well, we've been voting. I've been voting for it.
Are you going to pull out? Are you going to vote out of Europe?
So
are you going to vote out of Europe?
We won't have that referendum.
You won't have it?
Until it passes through Parliament. I've been voting for that bill. The Lib Dems who had it in their manifesto failed to vote for that referendum.
Will you vote for leaving Europe
in 2017?
You won't answer my question.
I will answer your question if you stop heckling me. I'll answer your question.
I'm not heckling you. I'm just repeating the question.
Okay.
Will you vote yes or no?
I can't vote yes or no until there's a referendum. I've been voting for that referendum. I've been voting for the referendum. And as soon as that referendum comes, which we can all have by 2017 with a Conservative government elected next time round, I will vote depending on how the negotiation has gone to get powers back to Britain.
All right. John Sentamu.
Alex Bell, all I'll say that in an area of mass unemployment, and a lot of them, particularly young people, I actually think that if more people then came into that area, sometimes willing to take jobs which others won't want to take, will create a much greater pressure. There's no doubt about it. We've got to be honest about it. It will create a great pressure on those already employed, unemployed, and trying to look for work. All I would say that this particular region, by the way, has got a much balanced surplus of trade than any other region in the rest of the country. Nissan cars and all they've been doing is just amazing what they've done. But that doesn't take away that we've got to tackle the whole question, particularly youth unemployment. And in turn, you know, when you get more migration in a place where there is difficulty of employment, then really, it seems to me that should not be just purely the region that looks after it. The government has got to have a responsibility for it as well. And then finally, I would say, I'm answering that question because myself, I've got declared an interest. I'm an immigrant too. And I'm glad nobody shut the door on me.
Did you seek asylum?
We are too. We are too.
You were an asylum seeker,
Yes.
not an economic...
No, it wasn't.
A religious immigrant.
It was...
As it turned out. Anyway.
Well, no, I mean, Uganda, was butchering people left and right, and I had taken decisions of law, which he didn't actually appreciate. My wife and I had to get out. We just had me a suitcase, and I'm very grateful for the kind of support. But most people were coming here. Let's be very, very careful. The Polish who were willing to come and work, some of them were actually willing to be paid very, very low wages. And that's why it seems to me that this minimum wage question has got to be answered.
Okay.
Because they also then displaced quite a lot of other people who otherwise could have been in work. It's a small island. It cannot constantly just take in everybody. But please, could we take the kind of, what I call it, ideology and be more civil? Should we take out the blame culture and be more interested about solutions?
Thank you. Tim Farron.
I'll give you a short answer by saying I agree with John Sentamu, but by and large, OK, immigration brings challenges, of course it does. But I just want to, you know, without any kind of hesitation, say that immigration is a blessing and not a curse, and more politicians need to say that, because when you think about what immigration and the diversity of our communities has done for this country over the years, it has clearly been a net benefit. If you want to just look at the financial side of it, the OECD estimates that immigration is worth $7 billion to the British economy. And then just think it's not one-way street. There are 1.5 million British people permanently living elsewhere in the European Union. There's 10,000 of them on the dole in Germany at the moment, for example. So the idea that this is a country that is allowing itself to be sponged off is nonsense. This is a country that has always been proud of being inclusive and open, and that's how I want it to remain.
OK. We've only got a few minutes left. I'll take a question, please, from Dorothy Puhala.
Is Francois Hollande's affair a public matter, or should he be allowed to conduct his private life in any way he chooses?
Francois Hollande's affair, a public matter. Who'd like to answer this one?
Me.
Go for it. Go on, then.
Well, I think what consenting adults do between themselves after work is a matter for them and them alone. And I think what's been interesting is the way that the French press and the French public don't really seem to care a jot and have shrugged their shoulders and moved on. But what I want to know is, he's the president. Where does he get the time?
All right. And you in the front here. Yeah, hold on just a second. Yes. Yes.
One of the things I think is that somebody who cheats on their partner or wife or something, if they will cheat in one way, they will cheat in another way and be untrustworthy.
Right.
Can I come back?
Yes. Do you agree with her?
I absolutely do agree with that. I don't think it excludes someone from high office because they have an affair. You should say he's not actually married and hasn't. He believes it's a bourgeois construction, I believe. But it's certainly relevant for voters to know. I suppose what I really want to say is that Francois Hollande is lucky that I'm not the First Lady of France, because I wouldn't be the one in hospital, he would be. But I have huge admiration for the fact that a man who looks like he's a middle manager in a small branch of Asda has managed to do so well with the ladies. But I'm surprised, actually, the French have taken an interest, because for many decades they haven't. And I suppose more of it is down to not so much what he's doing to the French actress, but to the fact that he's also doing it to the French economy.
The man there. Yes.
I just think it's another example of why personal
yes.
integrity seems unimportant in the world of politics. I always thought that leaders were supposed to lead by example.
Tim Farron.
I mean...
You've got your own local difficulty over Lord Reynard, haven't you? You're all trying to get him to say sorry for inappropriate behaviour. He won't, and you won't do anything about it.
Which do you want me to answer?
Mine.
Yours. Poor guy.
And then you can do him.
I'll have them both. Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. I mean, on this particular issue, the Reynard issue, I'm not here to defend the Liberal Democrats. My job is to prove them in terms of this matter. Over, what, a decade, this issue is allowed to fester. And what has happened this week, I'm afraid, is not the source of the problem. The source of the problem is if you are in an organisation, let this be a lesson for any political party, any charity, any university, any business, if you allow complaints or harassment or issues that are raised like that to fester and you don't deal with them properly, then you end up with the appalling situation that we found ourselves in.
He denies what I'm doing, that's
He's
your problem.
entitled to do so, but you've read the QC's report and he makes it very, very clear.
You didn't give him the QC's report.
Alistair Webster makes it very clear in the statement that he's made that Chris Reynard has absolutely seen that he must apologise. Now, it's a totally unsatisfactory situation.
All right,
you deal with it much sooner, that's the answer.
Back to the gentleman up there. What was it you said? We've forgotten it now. Just repeat the point.
I said it was another example of how personal integrity seems unimportant in the world of politics.
It massively matters. I mean, the reality is, yes, of course, people are entitled to a private life. And my heart goes out to Valerie Trevella, who is, you know, clearly, it's not a laughing matter that she was hospitalised as a consequence of all this. We should feel deep compassion for her, and my concern for our land's privacy only really stretches as far as her in this respect. But, yes, I think you mentioned earlier on, the reality is the character of a politician, of a leader, anybody, is demonstrated not just in what they do in the public sphere, but what they do in their private lives. And if you cheat on people close to you, you might well cheat on others in another way, and you may not be able to trust them in other ways too. Yes, it does matter.
OK. Grant Shapps, do you agree with that interpretation, that if you commit adultery, you'll commit adultery on the economy, on the voter, on the industry?
No, actually, I don't quite see it that way. I'm probably closer to the view that what he does with his private life is his business. But I will say this. When he was over here in France's fifth biggest city, London, before his electioneering, I do remember Ed Miliband greeting him and saying that he wanted to follow in Hollande's footsteps. I don't think he meant in this regard, but the bit that I think worries the French people right now and will worry Brits is that unemployment in France is 11%. There are more companies going bust in France than ever before. The country's headed back into recession. His policies have been a disaster, and they've hurt the poorest people in society the most. It's a warning sign for us, and it's something we must never allow to happen in this country.
John Sentamu, last word to you. Is it a public matter what François Hollande does with his private life?
If we in France, the French, because of their liberty and fraternity, they genuinely believe that's a private matter. That's the French way of looking at life. But the problem is this, they've also been asking, do we have a first lady? So they're beginning to realise that this question of liberty and fraternity has some limits. You can't simply go all the way. All I would say, once you're in public life, the private can't easily be separated. And I want to suggest that, as my mother said, never point a finger at anybody, because when you do, three others are pointing at you. I'm a sinner who's constantly needing the grace of God, and all I can say, you can't separate public from private, because that's really seems to me a cop-out, actually, at the end of the day.
OK. Thank you very much. That's our hour up, I'm afraid. Next week we're going to be in Dundee, and the week after that we're going to be in Norwich. Now, if you could like to come to Dundee or to Norwich to argue with our panel, take part, ask them questions, all the rest of it, do the usual thing. You can apply to our website. The address is on the screen there now. And you can call the number there, 0330 123 9988. A reminder, you probably don't need it if you're listening to Radio 5 Live, that the debate goes on Question Time Extra Time. But here in this studio, my thanks to all our panellists and to all of you who came to take part in the programme. Until next Thursday from Question Time, good night.
As the panel were just discussing, does everyone have the right to a private life? Former footballer David Jalola talks to This Week next here on BBC One.